Hey, good morning, afternoon. Welcome back. Today, let's listen and share some listening advice that I've received from crisis workers. These are people who work with individuals who are in a lot of distress, who really require sensitive and careful listening to navigate problems. One man here, this is Alan Stokes. He works for Helpline. This is in Australia, and it's a phone number that people with severe mental health distress can call to try and help them through their problems. And this man down here, Paul Nadeau, he is a former hostage negotiator. So when somebody commits a crime, for example, a home invasion or a bank robbery, and there's a situation where they have prisoners, Nadeau is the man who tries to talk to the suspect and resolve the situation peacefully. So both of these men have a lot of useful wisdom to share about listening because they have to deal with very delicate situations where the consequences can literally be life or death. Let's go. The first thing that both men have talked about is communicating with people starting from a rapport building frame. Basically, you have to build some kind of rapport or trust in order to get somebody to cooperate with you. Listen to what Paul has to say about this.
You'll see that the good negotiators walk in and say, looks like you're having a terrible day. What's going on? It's very, very simple. And then you really listen. You really listen and you make sure that you understand. And, a lot of times I would be talking to somebody, and if I wasn't clear, or if I thought I assumed I knew, I wouldn't do that. I'd turn around and I would say, so Oscar, if I understand you correctly, what you're asking me or what you're telling me is this. And then the receiver of that, like the moment you say, what? Or you hear this, he's asking me if he understood me correctly. Wow, I like this person. That person's really listening to me.
So as you can see, Paul does not approach from a place of judgment. Rather, he seeks to understand on the terms of the person that he is speaking to. He starts with an observation like, yeah, seems like you're having a very, very bad day. And then he invites them to really tell their side of the story. What's going on? This can be really helpful when speaking to students as well. If a student is acting up or having a bad day, rather than coming at them saying, why do you misbehave? It can be a lot more beneficial and productive to start with the idea of there's a good reason behind what they're doing. Yeah, Minji, it seems like you're not having a very good day. What's going on? Allow them to tell their side of the story. Allow them to feel heard. The next tip that I gathered was a little bit counterintuitive, but it's to avoid why questions. Now, this I found fascinating because when growing up, when I used to think about what are some good questions to ask people I speak to, why is one of the best ones because it is a more open-ended question and it invites deeper responses and motivations so that you can build a connection with the other person. However, what Alan points out is that in some situations, the why questions can be laced with judgment. Take a listen to what he has to say.
An example of an open-ended question sometimes that falls flat is the why question.
Why questions are loaded with judgment quite often. Not always, but 90% of the time. Why do you do that? Why are you asking me in that tone of voice? Why did you decide to stay with your abusive wife or husband? Why didn't you do this? As you can see in all of those questions, there's an implied judgment, an implied negativity. It's not a positive, non-judgmental approach. It's an approach that somehow comes with baggage.
So, according to Alan Stokes, the why question is often laced with judgment. It demands a kind of defense from the person that you're speaking to. And it's very personal. It can come across as a personal attack if you're not careful the way that you're speaking. Now, in some situations, whether that is a debate or a discussion aimed at reaching a particular solution or agreement, inquiring into the other person's reasoning or motivations is necessary. But in more emotionally delicate situations, why questions can come across as very aggressive. And there are many other ways you can substitute to avoid the judgment-laced why questions. Here is one example from Nadeau.
So we can come back and think about some of those phrases that Paul used. My favourite one, it's so short, it's so simple, it's so neutral. He simply asks, what happened? When journalists research a story, what happened is the question they use to collect different perspectives and notice how to listen both for similarities and differences in the same story by asking the same question. What happened? That might be a great question for you to practice when you're talking to somebody who has to deal with a lot of complex and complicated information.
So as you can see, it can benefit to ask more neutral what or how questions. So instead of saying something like, why were you late? It could sound a lot more neutral and more inviting to say, I noticed that you were late today. What happened? Another one we just discussed was, what's going on? You know, I noticed that you've been a little bit more talkative and a little bit less respectful in class today. What's going on? These more neutral what or how questions don't imply judgment or blame. They merely ask the other person to share their side of the story, and it invites more rapport and more of a deeper listening experience. If you have an interpersonal conflict, whether that's with your students or your coworkers, these kinds of neutral what or how questions can be a lot more productive than the more defensive why questions. All right, thank you so much for listening today. I think that these crisis workers have a lot of valuable advice with the difficult work that they do that can help us as teachers in our offices and in our classroom. So I hope you found this useful, and I look forward to seeing you in the next class. Until then, cheers.